Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. One football story from the weekend. And we always say this with the NFL draft. We do a lot of college football on this show. For the thousands of you who have found this podcast in the last 2-3 months, we do talk a lot of college football. But this isn't a show that we spend a month talking about the draft and the day after we're doing, like, that's not what we're about. If you need an Atlanta Falcons draft grade, this isn't the show. But if there's a big story that happens, we're going to cover it. And I'll tell you this, I don't think there is a bigger story in sports right now, and I would argue, I think this is going to go down. When we look back at the end of 2025, the biggest stories in sports in 2025, I think Shedeur Sanders NFL Draft fall will be among the top ones. This was a kid, when the process started, we thought could go number 1 overall. Going into draft night, I think people thought that he could go, probably the floor, as in the worst case scenario, was 21 to the Steelers, and he could still go in the top 10, maybe to the Saints, maybe to the New York Giants. He falls to the 144th overall pick. For those of you scoring at home, that's in the 5th round of the draft. So what ended up happening? Because I think what I want to do now, just spend a few minutes. There are 2 different conversations in my mind. What happened? But also, what is the fit for Shedeur now that we know that he's a Cleveland Brown? Because to me, I actually think the fit is pretty good. So in terms of what happened, so first of all, if you missed it on the YouTube channel, we did a standalone segment on Shedeur Sanders. The audio audience got a full pod preview talking about the first round of the NFL draft. But I'll be honest, I was somebody that thought he was going to go in the first round. And so we did a reaction on the first round slide. And I'll tell you this, I actually thought pretty quickly it could go sideways for Shedeur in the second round, because to me, something pretty significant happened early in the second round that indicated to me that, this might be more serious than we thought. And it was basically that he didn't go in the first pick or 2 of the second round. If you follow the NFL draft, what you know, the 33rd pick is actually like one of the most coveted spots in the NFL draft. First round ends 32 picks. And then you have a full day, if you're in the 33rd spot, to listen to trade offers. And if there's somebody that somebody wants, they're fighting and clawing to get into that 33rd spot. A few years ago, listen, we can say whatever we want about Will Levis, how it ended up with the Titans, but teams were fighting to get into that spot. Will Levis was the first pick of the second round to the Tennessee Titans. Last year, Keon Coleman, first pick of the second round, the Bills traded up to get him. So when there were no teams seemingly fighting to trade up, and then when the Cleveland Browns, who needed a quarterback, apparently 2, ended up passing on him, you're like, this might get really bad. But I'll be real, there was no scenario where I saw him falling completely out of day 2. And as we talk about what happened, listen, I'll be real. 1, I'll just own it. I was dead wrong. I was old takes exposed on Thursday night. I thought he was going to go somewhere in the top 10. Again, I thought the floor was the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the question now becomes, what ended up happening? Why did it go so sideways? And to me, I really think it's kind of a perfect storm for Shedeur. I feel bad for him. I know a lot of people don't have sympathy for him. Whatever, you're allowed your opinion. I think it's really kind of a perfect storm of a bunch of stuff that worked against him. I think, 1, listen, maybe everybody just overrated him as a prospect. I personally, I'll tell you, I thought he was the best quarterback I saw in college football this past year. You can argue with me. You can fight with me. Indisputable facts. 74% completion percentage, 37 touchdowns, all Big 12 first team, top 10 in the Heisman. By the end of Friday night, I think people were talking about this guy as if he was basically, you know what they were talking about him like? Like he was Bronny James. Like he was only on the field at Colorado because his dad was the head coach. And all I'll say is, listen, there are 12 coaches that vote on the all Big 12 first team, okay? Most of them put Shedeur as the best quarterback in the league that year. Heisman voters all over the country determined that in college football, he was one of the 10 best players in the country. But I do think as the draft process wore on, the concerns started to become greater. The arm strength. The fact that, listen, I even said on Friday night or Thursday night, I'll own it. 74% completion percentage. He did take a lot of sacks, though. I mean, holds on the ball a little bit too long. I think you should be able to coach that out of him, whatever. But those are all the reasons why. And then I think there's a couple other variables. 1, I think it's worth noting, it appears as though the interview process just did not go well. Now, I told you on Thursday night, if you watch that segment, I talked to somebody this weekend, or I talked to somebody on Thursday that was in the building with him every single day this past year. They said, no issues, great kid, teammates loved him, whatever. But what I can't deny, you don't go from top 10 potentially to the 5th round if you don't turn some people off, okay? So whatever happened in the interviews, I think it's sort of irrelevant now. I actually thought Shedeur handled it well in the post, the post everything, where he was asked about this at a press conference on Saturday night, and he basically said it doesn't matter what impression I made on any other team. What matters is that the Cleveland Browns like me, and now I'm ready to prove, Mr. Stefanski and Mr. Barry correct. Was he humble a little bit? I think he probably was. But I think there's no doubt that hurt him. And then what I think really hurt him is a combination of two things. There just weren't that many teams that needed quarterbacks. And then on top of it, I think even some of the teams that maybe would have considered him like as a backup, maybe the Los Angeles Rams, maybe the Seattle Seahawks who drafted Jalen Milroe, I think they just didn't think they were ever going to be in a position to actually draft him. And so you start to wonder, would there have been a team or two that may have been interested but just assumed he was going to be off the board in the top 10 and they'd never have a chance to draft him? So it is a crazy slide. It is a crazy fall. But I also don't think it changes the fact that, I'll be real, I think this was a pretty good landing spot for Shedeur Sanders at the next level. Now, listen, we're going to find out if he's good enough. But first off, I was thinking about this after the draft, and it sounds kind of crazy, but when you really actually break it down, what kind of stood out to me thinking about this draft? The number of teams that both needed a quarterback, but actually, let me put it, there's a difference between a team that needs a quarterback for their roster, but then also a team that actually has the opportunity to play for your team next year, okay? So I'll give you an example. The Indianapolis Colts are going to figure out Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, whatever. But they drafted Riley Leonard late just because they need another body on their roster. Philadelphia Eagles added Kyle McCord late because they need another body on their roster. But the number of teams that are actually going to that drafted a quarterback who might actually play this year, I counted a grand total of 4, and that's kind of being actually, pretty nice about it. 1, Tennessee Titans, that goes without saying. It doesn't feel like Shedeur was ever really in the mix there. 2, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers. We don't know what's going on with Aaron Rodgers. So do the Steelers have a starting opening or not? Is Mason Rudolph the guy? Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? The Steelers, you feel like, may have an opening, but we don't even know that for sure yet. And we might not know it for another month or 2, depending on what Aaron Rodgers wants to do on some ayahuasca retreat as we speak. So we have no idea with Aaron Rodgers. The third team is the New Orleans Saints. Now they claim that Derek Carr is going to be their starter. We'll see what ends up happening there. But I just bring it up because you just don't know if there's actually going to be an opening for a quarterback to actually see the field on that team. And then every other team is basically set. New England Patriots have Drake May, even the bad teams. New England Patriots have Drake May. Denver Broncos drafted a quarterback. They weren't bad. They were in the playoffs, but you get the point. The Jets are rolling with Justin Fields. Even the Giants, they drafted Jackson Dart, but Russell Wilson's going to be their starter week 1. And so you actually look at the teams that will have an opportunity for a quarterback to go in and win the job. It's basically the Tennessee Titans and maybe the Cleveland Browns, and that's basically it. And you look at that depth chart, and all of a sudden, I'll tell you what, I think there's a scenario where not only does Shedeur Sanders play, I think he plays early if he's actually good enough, okay? And so you look at this depth chart here, and producer Matt, I appreciate you having that ready to go. 5 quarterbacks in that room. And by the way, I know all of you know this. You've read every blog and website and probably watched a lot of YouTube content at this point. But 5 quarterbacks: Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and oh, by the way, Dylan Gabriel, who was drafted before Shedeur Sanders, which I don't understand, but that's another conversation for another day. But that's the QB room that Shedeur Sanders is walking in. Well, Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles, October, November? Listen, Deshaun Watson is a questionable character at best. I'm not personally rooting for injuries for him, but he ain't coming back from an Achilles this season. Joe Flacco, I love him. He's 40 years old. He ain't built for a 17-game season, especially in the AFC North with that Baltimore defense coming after him and TJ Watt in Pittsburgh. Even if he's the day one starter or he's the presumed starter going into camp, he ain't going to make it 18 weeks. I hope, I'm not rooting for injury. I'm just stating he's 40 years old. That's a tough division. Dylan Gabriel's good. He's not better than Shedeur. I'm sorry, he just isn't. And Kenny Pickett, I don't even think is very good. I think in a best case scenario, he was the backup to begin with. I think Shedeur is better than him. And so listen, how good is Shedeur? We're going to find out. I'm going to stand by what I said. He was the best quarterback I saw in college this year, at least like NFL ready quarter in terms of guys that I thought could step in. Does Drew Aller maybe have a higher upside at Penn State? Sure. Does Cade Klubnik have a higher upside at Clemson? Sure. But they're not in the NFL draft. Arch Manning is not in this draft. And so of the guys that could have conceivably been able to be drafted, I thought Shedeur was the best. Now it's kind of on him to prove everybody wrong. And I think that's the closing thought I would have on this subject, on this topic, is whether you like Shedeur or not. If you thought he needed to be humbled, this feels like the thing that should do it, right? This feels like the thing that should do it. Again, whatever happened in the in the process to get to Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whatever happened in those interview rooms, I don't know. I mean, listen, I have speculation. I've talked to a few people. Nobody said anything like super cryptic to me about how bad he was or anything like that. But if he needed to be humbled, this feels like a good piece of humble pie for him to eat. You go from a presumed, when the day ended, when the season ended, I think everybody thought he was going in the top 10. It was just a matter of where, to now a 5th round pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Obviously not how you wanted the draft to go. Obviously, you wouldn't have minded being a Brown. You would have hoped it was 5 rounds, 4 rounds sooner, and you were a top 3 pick. But at the end of the day, I think it could have gone much worse. Shedeur Sanders is a Cleveland Brown. And I'm telling you, I put out a tweet on Saturday. If he does things well, I think he's your starter by December 1st. I really, truly do. I think they're going to give Joe Flacco the nod. I think Joe Flacco's frankly not going to be good enough. The division's too tough. And I think by, mid to late November, they're just going to have to see what they have in Shedeur if Shedeur is actually good enough. So we'll see what happens, but Shedeur Sanders is a Cleveland Brown, and we will see what the impact is from there.